Hi, Job.
How are you?
Excellent. How are you? This is a good question. Because yeah, it does matter where you come from, right? So you're talking about the fact that there's this idea that we all come to money from a different perspective. And it's not just, did I grow up without money or did I grow up with way too much money? Because of course I'll see it from a different angle if I grew up in one of those circumstances, but you could still believe that money is the root of all evil, even if you grew up poor or if you grew up with more money than you needed, right? And so the question of, do people tend to become more successful if they come from one particular background or another is, well, yeah, like there is an element of the deck is already stacked. Nobody is self-made. Self-made is a myth. Nobody can do it on their own. We have to rely on other people, and we also have to acknowledge that where we came from makes a massive difference in where we end up. And yet, I don't think that you can say that one or the other is more advantageous or better. Those are the things that are beyond our control, right? It's like we have to ultimately at some point say, hey, like, what is within my realm of control and what's not? There's these two more technical terms that we talk about sometimes when we talk about this. One is called the locus of control. And that's basically saying like, hey, what is within my control and what's not? I can't control where I was born or the circumstances of me growing up, but what I can control is my mindset about it. And that's also like, there's this ancient, I think it comes from the Buddhist tradition where, yeah, I think it was even Siddhartha talking about it, where every time you have something happen in your life, they called it the two arrows. The first arrow is whatever happens to you. Something bad can happen to you, and that's an arrow that might feel painful or whatever. But the bigger pain is the second arrow, and that arrow is our response, specifically our thinking about whatever it is that actually happened. And we tend to inflict more pain on ourselves thinking about whatever it is that happened than we do the first thing that was completely out of our control that just happened to us. And so that's the idea of the locus of control. The other one is this idea of the locus of attention. So I liken this to climbing mountains a lot because there's this moment, like I'm a skier, you get into these situations sometimes where you're climbing a steep line that has a lot of exposure that you can't fall. And in order to do that, you typically are doing it at a time in the season when you climb while the snow is very hard, and then you let it soften up as it gets warmer. And so when you're climbing with the snow being very frozen, you wear spikes on your feet and you bring an ice axe. And so you're literally kicking into these. And so as you can imagine, you find yourself in situations sometimes where if you happen to expand your locus of attention and you're looking down and all around you, you're like, oh my, like, because I mean, it is real. If you fall, the consequences are very bad. And so the only thing that you can do is say, hey, like, I can't control certain things. I can't control if there's rock fall, so I have to accept that as a risk. But what I can control is my reaction to that and where I'm placing my attention. So if I zoom my attention back in from this big view to just looking at what is in front of me right now and taking one next step, then you bring yourself back into a place where you can do something that perhaps you for a moment thought you wouldn't be able to do. And this happens in our finances also, where, you know, whatever the circumstances are that we grew up with, we can't control those, and those will put you ahead or put you back. But what we can control is zooming in on what can I do right now that will get me one step further, one step at a time. And the starting place for that I recommend for people at least, is to understand the circumstances through which they grew up. The circumstances of where they were, you know, where were they born? Like, what was their family finances like? Because that will impact us. But then also, how do we perceive each of those things? Because if we hold that belief that money is the root of all evil, then we'll probably handle our money differently, right? Because if I believe that money is the root of all evil, well then if I start accumulating more money, I become one of them, right? So I might even block myself from doing that. So you talked a little bit about like what's my story, and my story has many different parts to it, but I think the big thing for me is that I grew up in a family that I now understand more of, but at the time, I don't think I understood the way that my dad interacted with money. And basically, the way he interacted with money was he wanted to make sure that his family never had to worry about it because he grew up very poor. He grew up with his dad constantly reminding him that they could not spend more money and feeling restricted and not being able to take advantage of opportunities in life. It turns out that his dad actually had a Depression era mindset, so he actually was saving a lot of money for a rainy day, and he was doing like the classic thing that we hear about sometimes where Depression era folks were sometimes saving cash under their beds and stuff, right? So he grew up in that circumstance where he wasn't able to as fully experience the moment now because his dad was so worried about something happening in the future that they were not allowed to spend right now. And his dad ended up with more money than he needed, and he passed away with that more money. Now, people get to decide what they want to do with their money, and that's a whole different topic that's very important to go into. But essentially, like, you get to decide if you want to pass your money on. People might actually really want to do that. Oftentimes I'll suggest to folks who are in that boat older in their life that if you want to pass your money on, consider passing some of it on now while you are alive and you can share experiences with your family. But again, that's a whole nother conversation, and it's something that I think many people should think about how they want to use their money in that regard. But the point is that for my dad, his dad passed away, perhaps never taking the fullest advantage of using his money to live his life for the now because he was so worried about the future. Many people have the opposite problem where they spend too much money now and they end up getting to a place where they're like, I can never retire. And so we have to figure out what is that balance and how do we approach it. But for my dad, he ended up deciding, I want my family to never experience what I experienced. And so he worked a lot. And I felt like that call for money was the thing that sometimes kept him apart from me and like us not spending time together that I wanted to. And so I think that's where I sort of grew up with this belief that money is that, you know, maybe not the root of all evil, but I was pushed away from it. I said that at the end of the day, you can design a beautiful life even without having lots of money, because money isn't the thing that makes us happy. And so for me, I think that belief stuck with me. It actually is part of what ultimately made me go into the sciences and then to become a teacher. Is I had that servant's mindset where I'm like, I don't need more money. I have a perfectly happy life with where I am right now. And I'm serving people, I'm creating community. And yet there was a point in time that I realized that I was doing that same thing. I was not necessarily accumulating more money because of that belief. And there's lots of things to say on that front too, right? Some people say money is about circulation, not accumulation, things like that. But at the same time, I realized that I was not doing a lot of simple, small things that would ensure that I felt safe and secure for the rest of my life. And I think that is a value that is important for me, is I do want to feel secure so that I can also feel like I'm really generous with my money. I want to be able to tip big because I know that people who are working in jobs that get tips are not getting a minimum wage, they're getting the tip minimum wage and they're not making enough and they rely on it. And so I think those are some of the values that ultimately for me started to change my mind a bit about what this thing is to begin with. And I think that's a really valuable step for a lot of people.